Hey there, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I woke up before the others because I could not fall back asleep after the first noise outside. It sounded like metal shifting against metal, probably one of the loose gates on the far end of the yard. The warehouse always made those noises, but after 30 days of this outbreak, I reacted to every one of them. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, waiting to hear if anything followed. Nothing did. I sat up on the cot and pulled on my boots, trying not to wake the people across from me. The warehouse used to store plastic pallets and old retail stock. Now it held 17 people who never planned to live together. The air felt stale every morning. Some of that came from the propane stove we used at night, some from the bodies, and some from the fear that never went away. Mark sat by the door with the lantern turned low. His beard had grown out unevenly, and his eyes looked hollow. He nodded when I passed, but he looked like a man who barely slept. I did not blame him. When this many people shared one room, no one ever rested fully. I checked the cooler in the corner first. The ice was still firm. The insulin vials were lined up in a row. I counted them twice, not because I doubted the numbers, but because checking them settled my thoughts. The kid who needed them slept near the back wall. His breathing sounded rough. If we lost the cooler or the ice melted too quickly, he had no chance. The rest of us could push through hunger, dehydration, or injuries. That kid could not go 12 hours without a dose. I stepped outside through the loading dock door. The morning air felt damp and cold against my face. The sky was grey, not from weather but from smoke drifting in from the city to the west. From where I stood, the city looked quiet. No traffic, no lights, nothing moving, except for the infected that wandered through the streets at random. Sometimes I spotted small groups clustered near old grocery stores or gas stations. Sometimes only one drifted by the yard. I kept my distance from all of them. They were not fast enough to chase a truck at full speed, but they were fast enough to close distance if someone tripped or hesitated. The infected changed over the last month. The ones who turned first were slower, disoriented, almost confused. The newer ones moved straighter and responded to sound faster. Some carried burns from the fires that spread after the city collapsed. Their clothes melted into their skin. A few had bone fractures that never healed because they never stopped walking. I watched one crawl under a fence last week, even though both legs bent the wrong direction. It kept going until it hit the wall of a shed, then dragged itself along the side. Watching behavior like that stripped away any hope that the government would control this. Whatever the infection was, it did not slow down. I leaned against the side of the warehouse and looked east. The nuclear plant sat beyond the hills, close enough that I used to drive there in half an hour. I worked maintenance inside the auxiliary systems, instrumentation, pump housings, electrical checks, simple jobs that never made me feel important but paid well enough to stay afloat. I knew the plant's hallways better than I knew most streets in the city. I never thought I would return to that place under these circumstances. I never thought I would be thinking about radiation or water levels while the world fell apart around me. 4 days ago, everything changed. I heard a deep rumble over the valley, too loud for thunder, too uneven for a civilian aircraft. I climbed onto the roof to see it. A large military plane moved across the sky, low and unstable. Smoke poured from the tail. It drifted toward the ridge that separated our valley from the plant. I stood there watching because I could not look away. The aircraft vanished behind the ridge. A bright flash lit the tree line, and the blast rolled over the valley. Loose panels on the warehouse rattled. Everyone ran outside. We watched a column of smoke rise until it mixed with the rest of the haze. That same night, one of the plant's emergency frequencies came alive for a short moment. A voice I recognized spoke over static. He sounded strained and out of breath. He mentioned water levels and failing readings. He mentioned a pump that would not stay online. Then he stopped mid-sentence, and something crashed in the background. The radio stayed silent after that. I listened for 2 more hours, hoping he would come back. He never did. Inside the warehouse, everyone tried to ignore what the crash might mean. None of us wanted to think about the plant becoming another disaster on top of everything else. But I knew the systems better than anyone here, and the numbers in my head kept lining up in ways I did not like. The reactors shut down early in the outbreak, which meant they were stable, but the spent fuel still produced heat. The pool needed circulation. If the crash damaged piping or knocked out backup generators, water could be dropping inch by inch. Slow problems become permanent problems if no one notices in time. I walked back inside to get warm. The others were waking up. Danielle checked the insulin cooler. A few people sorted canned goods and water bottles. Nothing looked calm. Everyone moved quietly, avoiding each other's eyes. No one wanted to talk about the crash anymore. They wanted the world to settle into something predictable, even if it was a smaller life inside this warehouse. Mark stopped me near the tool pallets and asked if I slept at all. I told him no. He asked why. I told him I kept thinking about the crash and the transmission. His jaw tightened when I said that. Some of the others pretended not to listen, but their eyes stayed fixed on us. I said I needed to check the plant. I said it straight because hesitation made people nervous. A few gasps came from the group. One woman asked if the plant could blow up. I told her no, not like in movies, but if the spent fuel became exposed, the contamination would reach this valley. Every drop of water they collected from the river would be useless. Every crop they hoped to grow would fail. People did not need dramatic explosions to lose their lives. A slow leak could do it quietly. No one argued with me after that. A few tried to talk me out of going, but their words felt empty. They knew someone had to look. They knew I was the only one who understood what to check. I did not want this responsibility, but pretending everything was fine would not save us. I gathered what tools I could carry without slowing myself down. A pry bar, a flashlight with half a battery left, insulated gloves, a dosimeter, and a small canvas bag with wrenches. I grabbed the pump shotgun we kept locked away and checked the shells. 6 total, not enough for mistakes. My hands felt stiff as I loaded it. The weapon gave me no comfort. It only reminded me that getting cornered inside the plant would be a short fight. I packed water, a small first aid kit with barely anything left, and whatever food I could slip into the side pockets of my jacket. I kept thinking about the internal layout of the plant, the narrow hallways, the long corridors, the blind corners, the echo of boots on metal grating, the smell of oil near the pump rooms. Those memories felt distant now. When I stepped outside again, the sky had brightened. A few infected wandered at the far end of the yard, far enough to ignore. I turned the truck's engine over. It shook for a moment, then steadied. The fuel gauge hovered near 3/4, enough to reach the plant and get back, as long as I did not need to drive around wreckage for miles. Everyone stood by the loading bay watching me. Mark crossed his arms. Danielle stayed close to the cooler, probably thinking about the kid who depended on her. The others looked tired. No cheers, no support, just worry. That was real. That was honest. I nodded to them and drove out through the gate. The road leaving the industrial district had changed since the outbreak. Burned cars sat halfway on the sidewalk. Traffic lights hung sideways, ready to fall. I saw a body slumped against a bus shelter. The infection had taken whole neighborhoods before the evacuation even began. Schools emptied. Hospitals overflowed. Some people disappeared inside their homes and never left. Those who turned wandered through the streets until they found noise, light, or movement. Those who survived fought for scraps or hid anywhere with a locked door. South toward the city, I could see smoke rising from a cluster of buildings. People still fought over supplies there. I avoided that direction. I took the east route instead. The infected density dropped as the road curved past the suburbs. I saw a few moving in the distance, but they reacted slowly. Some moved in uneven steps. Some tilted their heads as if trying to orient themselves. All of them had dried blood near their mouths and torn patches on their clothes. Closer to the plant, the highway cleared. The crash site came into view on the left, the burned stretch of trees, scraps of twisted metal, and the blackened trail where the aircraft plowed into the ridge. I slowed down to look. Several large pieces of the fuselage rested at odd angles. One looked like it held a cockpit section. I saw no survivors, living or infected. The fire must have consumed most of the bodies. A few charred shapes lay near the impact trench, but nothing moved. The plant's outer fence appeared soon after. The tall metal posts and razor wire looked the same as always, but the main gate hung partially open. One guard booth was crushed inward. The window glass was shattered. Dried blood smeared across the concrete in front of it. Whoever worked that shift never stood a chance. The outbreak moved too fast for organized defense. I parked behind a concrete barrier and shut off the engine. I checked the shotgun again, then stepped out of the truck and waited a few seconds to listen. No immediate movement. No groans. No shuffling. Just the wind pushing trash across the pavement. I walked toward the open gate with slow steps, scanning every angle. A single infected stepped out from the administration entrance. He wore the blue plant uniform. His ID badge swung from a lanyard. I used to see men walk around with that same posture during night shifts. Now his movements were jerky and unpredictable. He saw me and came straight toward me. I lifted the shotgun and fired once. He fell without a sound. The noise echoed between the buildings and traveled deeper into the complex. I reached the administration door. The lock was broken. Inside, the emergency lights flickered in weak strips. Papers covered the hallway. Chairs lay overturned. A half-open locker spilled out someone's spare boots and uniform. The air smelled old, damp, and faintly metallic. Something moved at the end of the hall. I gripped the shotgun tighter and stepped in. I paused long enough to let my eyes adjust. The emergency lights were running on whatever backup remained, probably battery units mounted in the ceiling. They cast a dull orange glow that left the corners dark. I listened for a second sound that matched the shuffle I heard earlier. I caught faint dragging movements, but not fast or coordinated. That usually meant one infected, maybe two. The hall forked near the back, so whatever moved could be behind a wall or inside one of the office rooms. I raised the shotgun and moved slowly, placing each boot down carefully to avoid loose folders and debris that could crack loud underfoot. As I reached the first intersection, I glanced right. A body lay slumped in a chair, but the skin was grey and still, and a thick layer of dust clung to the shoulders. Whoever died there had been gone since the early days of the outbreak. Across from that body, a bulletin board hung crooked, covered with maintenance memos and printed schedules. I used to read those boards every morning without thinking. Seeing them again in this state brought a wave of something sharp, almost painful, but I pushed it aside. I could not afford that kind of focus now. The noise came again, farther down. This time I recognized the pattern. A heel scraping the tile floor, followed by a short pause, then another scrape. That usually meant the infected had one leg that no longer moved properly. They dragged the non-working leg behind them. I tracked the sound until I reached the hallway where the light cut off halfway down. A dark shape shifted just at the edge of visibility. I held still. If it had not noticed me yet, I wanted the first movement to be mine, not its. I flicked the flashlight on while keeping the barrel steady. The beam hit a man in a torn button-down shirt, someone I did not instantly recognize. His jaw moved in small, open and close motions, as if he were trying to form a sound. His eyes were dull, unfocused, and locked onto the light. He lurched forward. Not fast enough to surprise me, but fast enough that I did not want to waste a shell. I stepped back, braced the shotgun, and fired once. The sound thundered through the hall. Dust drifted from ceiling tiles. The infected hit the ground hard, arms twitching for a moment before going still. I waited a second to confirm he was not getting back up. Nothing moved. The echo settled. I kept moving, turning down the left corridor that led toward the administrative offices, and then to the walkway connecting this wing to the rest of the plant. This area had always been the quietest part of the facility during normal operations. Office staff, badge scanners, coffee machines, the usual corporate waste of space, casual talk, people laughing at break time. Now it felt empty in a way that pressed against my thoughts more than the infected did. The silence made my steps louder than I liked. Every breath felt too noticeable. I stayed close to the wall to limit my silhouette and peeked through open door frames as I passed. In one office, A desk chair lay overturned near a broken window. A smear of dried blood ran across the floor toward the hallway. The wall clock had stopped at a time that meant nothing now. A phone handset dangled off its cord. I moved on without entering. If anyone, or anything, had been inside, it would have moved at the sound of the shotgun blast. The fact that nothing stirred meant the infected density here was lower than I feared, at least in this wing. That could change once I reached the main plant corridors. Farther ahead, I reached the glass double doors leading to the walkway that connected administration to the auxiliary buildings. The glass had cracks near the handles, and one door leaned off its hinge. I pushed it gently with the shotgun barrel. It swung inward with barely any resistance. The walkway stretched ahead in a straight path with reinforced windows on both sides, showing the courtyard below. The courtyard once held picnic benches and short trees planted in neat rows. Now the benches were overturned, and the trees bent from heat damage and wind. A few infected moved far below, slow and aimless. None looked up. The walkway floor vibrated slightly as I walked, a reminder that the main structures still cycled through minor stress from temperature shifts. The plant was built to last earthquakes and storms. It could withstand a month without supervision, but small failures mattered too, and I kept thinking about the crash and the long chain reaction of problems that could follow even one damaged line. I had no way to know yet how bad the impact was. I had to reach the technical support center to read real data. When I reached the end of the walkway, I slowed and listened again. A faint mechanical hum came from deeper inside the plant. That was a good sign. It meant at least one system remained operational. Maybe an emergency light circuit or a backup ventilation loop still receiving power from a local battery or a failing generator. But the hum also meant echo patterns that could hide footsteps or breathing noises. I tightened my grip again and eased the next door open. The smell changed immediately. The auxiliary wing always carried a mix of oil, coolant, and warmed metal. I recognized it instantly. The emergency lights down this hallway were brighter than those in administration. The tiles had fewer stains, and the floor looked clearer. Someone had barricaded part of the hall with a stack of tables and a metal filing cabinet. That meant someone had been alive here after the outbreak started. Maybe the person from the radio transmission left this in place. I stepped around the barricade carefully, checking behind the overturned furniture. No movement, no bodies, only more scattered papers and a toolbox spilled against a wall. The toolbox caught my attention because several tools were missing: pliers, a small wrench, a portable tester. Whoever used them left in a hurry. That lined up with the frantic voice on the radio. I moved toward the technical support center. The closer I got, the louder the mechanical hum became. I finally reached the heavy double doors leading inside. One door was open about a foot. I nudged it with my knee and raised the flashlight. The room was larger than I remembered, mostly because it was empty of staff now. Banks of monitors lined the walls, most blank or powered down. A few glowed faintly with unstable signals. Paper printouts covered the main console. A rolling chair lay on its side. A half-empty water bottle sat on the floor. I stepped inside and swept the flashlight beam across the equipment. The monitors that still worked showed only fragments of readings, partial temperatures, offline indicators, and blinking warning icons where the system could not reach specific sensors. That was not unusual during a power cut, but some readings bothered me. The spent fuel pool temperature looked higher than it should have been during cold shutdown. Not extreme, but higher. The water level reading flashed intermittently between two values. That meant either a sensor failure or an actual drop in water. I took a seat and tried to steady my thoughts. For a moment, the chair's plastic pressed into my arms in a familiar way, almost like nothing had changed in this building. Then, I looked at the empty desks around me, and the illusion fell apart. I checked the panel for diesel generator output. One generator showed a flicker of activity. That meant it had been running recently or was trying to cycle. The others were dead. The crash probably damaged the switchyard or knocked out cables feeding the auxiliary power. If the last generator shut down again, the pumps tied to the spent fuel system would lose their stable cycle. I looked at the printed emergency notes left by whoever worked here last. The handwriting was rushed. The words loss of flow, erratic level, and manual override failed stood out. One note mentioned trying to reach the diesel building. Another mentioned returning with parts. The last line ended abruptly. I searched for any sign of struggle or blood but found none. Whoever wrote those notes either escaped deeper inside or never made it back. As I read, a faint noise behind me made my shoulders tense. I stood up quickly, shotgun raised. Something brushed against the floor near the far wall, soft, uneven. I aimed the flashlight and saw movement behind a metal cabinet. My first thought was an infected, but the shape seemed too small. I stepped closer, careful and slow. I did not lower the shotgun until I saw a pair of wide eyes staring back. It was a woman in a torn security uniform. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, hair matted, face pale. She crouched behind the cabinet with a small metal pipe in her hand. Her breathing hitched when she saw the light hit her. I lowered the shotgun a few inches to show I was not aiming. She asked if I was real. Her voice came out hoarse and weak. I nodded and told her to step out slowly. She hesitated, then stood up with slow, unsteady movements. She looked dehydrated, exhausted and frightened, in a way that went deeper than the usual fear of infected. I asked how long she had been there. She said she lost track of days but knew it had been several since the crash. She said she was part of the last group that tried to keep the plant stable. Some staff stayed behind after the evacuation to manage the shutdown process, but once the infected reached the outer wings, the group split. She and 2 others tried to hold this room. The others never returned. She said she stopped trying to reach the diesel building when she heard screams down the hall. She hid here ever since. She said her name was Harper. I asked if she knew the actual conditions of the spent fuel pool. She pointed toward one of the flickering screens and said the temperature kept climbing even before the crash. The circulation pump had been unreliable for days, relying on one generator that could not handle the load. She tried to manually reroute some of the auxiliary lines, but needed tools she could not reach. She looked ashamed when she said that, as if clarity meant admitting failure. I told her that no one could have handled this situation perfectly. The outbreak stripped away every safety net, every protocol, every chain of command. I asked her what she planned to do now. She said she had no plan left. She barely had water. She looked thin, her shoulders drawn tight under the uniform. I handed her one of my spare water bottles. She took it with shaky hands and drank several long pulls. Once she steadied herself, she asked what brought me here. I explained the warehouse, the people depending on a stable valley, the insulin, the radio transmission, the crash, and the numbers that would not leave my head. Harper listened quietly. When I finished, she said the only way to stabilize the pool was to restore steady auxiliary power and confirm the water level manually. That meant reaching the diesel building and checking for damage to the coolant loop. She looked at me as if expecting me to back out after hearing the full extent of the risk. I did not. I told her I intended to continue. She gave a tired nod and said she would guide me part of the way, but she could not promise she could fight. I told her I did not expect anything from her except awareness of the layout. Before leaving, I took one last look at the screens. The temperature readings for the pool were still high but not critical. That gave us time, but not as much as I wanted. I slung the shotgun over my shoulder and motioned for Harper to follow. She grabbed the metal pipe and tucked it under her arm. Seeing another human moving beside me brought a small piece of relief, but it also reminded me that extra footsteps meant extra noise and extra risk. I adjusted my pace to keep her behind me where I could track her movements. We left the technical support center and entered the deeper corridors of the plant. The hum of the emergency systems faded, replaced by long stretches of silence broken only by faint groans from distant hallways. Somewhere ahead, a door slammed lightly against its frame in a steady rhythm, pushed by wind or pressure changes. I felt the floor vibration under my boots again, steady and low. The plant still breathed in its own mechanical way, even half alive. The hallway narrowed as we moved forward. The overhead pipes ran closer to the ceiling, bundled together in thick lines that fed everything from ventilation to coolant transfer. I kept the shotgun raised while Harper followed closely behind me. She breathed quietly, but every few steps she winced as if her muscles were struggling. She had been hiding for days with almost no food, and it showed. She held the metal pipe tightly in one hand, but I wondered how much force she could actually put behind a swing. It was not fair to expect her to keep pace with someone who had slept, eaten, and carried proper tools. We reached a junction where 3 hallways intersected. One led toward the turbine wing, another toward the coolant monitoring station, and the third toward the route Harper suggested for accessing the diesel building. The air here felt warmer, drifting from vents that had been starved of proper circulation for too long. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my glove and checked each direction for shadows or movement. Nothing immediate, but the smell of decay grew stronger from the left corridor, the one leading toward the coolant monitoring station. Harper leaned on the wall and caught her breath. She pointed toward the corridor on the right, the one leading to the diesel building. She said the maintenance catwalk ahead had taken some damage after the crash. Metal panels dropped from the ceiling and blocked most of the passage. She tried to move them earlier, but did not have the strength. To get around that blockage, she used a side access door that required manual release from the control room in the pump wing. That meant one thing. Someone had to go to the pump wing first and unlock that door before anyone could reach the diesel building. I followed her explanation carefully. She pointed out that the direct route to the diesel building was too dangerous now. The collapse created an echo chamber that carried sound across the entire passage. Any infected inside would hear us the moment we stepped through. She tried it once and said the sound of her own footsteps bounced back so loud she had to retreat. The infected responded quickly. She barely reached the door in time. The side access door bypassed most of that danger, but the catch was simple. The locking mechanism had defaulted to a sealed state when the power failed. It needed a manual override from the pump wing control station to open. The pump wing was on the opposite side of this level. The rooms there were tight, full of metal platforms, ladders, and storage racks. Moving through that area with 2 people meant twice the noise, twice the chance of disturbing the infected that tended to linger around the damp areas and machinery hum. Harper rested her head against the wall and closed her eyes for a second. Then she said something I did not want to hear. She said I should go alone. I told her straight that splitting up in a place like this was stupid. 2 sets of eyes meant better reaction time. 2 bodies meant someone could pull the other out of trouble. I reminded her that I did not even know the exact path through the pump wing. She held up a hand and said she would guide me as far as the junction that fed into that section. But her strength would not hold if she had to climb and crawl through the pump platforms. She said she had tried that area during the first week after the outbreak, and the ladders drained her quickly. She nearly fell then, and she was in better shape at that time. I stayed quiet for a moment and thought through the layout in my head. The pump wing was noisy during regular operation, but dead silent now. That meant sound would travel farther. If her breathing or steps echoed through those metal platforms, the infected in nearby maintenance rooms would hear her. There was also the simple fact that most emergency cross points in that wing had to be passed by crawling under or over structural beams. Doing that while dehydrated and weak would be dangerous, and if she slowed down, I would be forced to either help her or leave her behind mid-route. Neither option made sense. She lifted the metal pipe and tapped it lightly against the wall. Then she pointed to the corridor with the strong smell. She said she heard infected tear through bodies in that direction 2 days ago. The doors in that area were the only thing keeping them contained. If we both went into the pump wing and something followed us, retreating together might not be possible. Splitting reduced the chances of both of us getting trapped in the same dead end. I asked what she would do while I was gone. She said she would return to the technical support center and stay inside the far corner behind the metal cabinet. She would keep the door partially closed and save her strength. She said if I did not return in 2 hours, she would assume I was gone and make her own attempt to escape the building. She said it calmly, as if she had already rehearsed it in her mind. I did not like the idea, but the logic lined up. The only way to reach the diesel building safely was through the side access door. The only way to unlock that door was from the pump wing control station. The pump wing path had narrow spaces and loud metal underfoot. Harper could not move quietly or quickly enough in her condition. Bringing her with me would slow us both and risk losing everything. And if something happened to me, she needed enough strength left to escape, not collapse somewhere behind me. I told her she should block the technical support center door with one of the rolling cabinets. She nodded and said she already thought of that. I told her I would return as fast as possible and to stay hidden no matter what noise she heard. She agreed, but her eyes showed that she did not fully trust the idea of waiting. She did not want to be alone again. I understood that too well. I did not want to be alone either. But survival did not care what we preferred. We headed back through the corridors, retracing our route to the last safe junction. Harper's steps grew slower with each turn, her legs trembling slightly. When we reached the entrance to the pump wing route, she stopped and leaned on the wall again. She told me the path ahead would first drop into a narrow stairwell where condensation collected. The metal was slippery. Then I would reach a small landing with 2 doors. The left one led to a dead monitoring room that had flooded slightly years ago and never fully dried. The right door, the one with yellow stripes on the frame, led to the ladder system that climbed into the pump control mezzanine. She described the layout with surprising clarity. She knew exactly where tools had been left before the outbreak, which corners carried sound, and which platforms tended to creak under weight. I appreciated the detail. It helped me picture the entire route in my head before stepping into it. I thanked her. She looked away for a moment and said she wanted to help more but knew she would make noise that would put us both at risk. I told her to stay alert and save her strength. Then I lifted the shotgun and moved toward the pump wing entrance alone. The moment I stepped through the doorway, the temperature dropped. Moisture coated the rails and the floor. I could smell stagnant water nearby. The hum of distant equipment was faint now, replaced by an occasional drip hitting metal. I glanced back once. Harper stood at the junction watching me. She raised a hand slightly as if to signal something unspoken, then turned and walked back toward the technical support center. I faced forward and kept moving, my boots making soft taps on the wet grating. The stairwell she described appeared after a short walk. I shined the flashlight downward. The steps glistened with moisture. A dark trail ran down one side, maybe from a broken pipe or condensation pooling from the ceiling. I tested the top step with my heel, shifting weight slowly until I trusted it. Then, I descended, gripping the railing with one hand and aiming the flashlight with the other. At the bottom, I reached the landing with the 2 doors. The one on the left sagged on its hinges. A faint smell of mold leaked from the bottom. I avoided it. The right door had the yellow stripe like Harper said. The paint had peeled in places, but it was still visible. I pressed my ear against the metal. No movement, no scratching, no breathing sounds. I opened it slowly. A metal ladder stretched upward into darkness. The rungs were cold. I slung the shotgun over my shoulder and climbed carefully. My gloves squeaked on the rails. Halfway up, I heard something drop above me. A small metallic clatter, quick and light. I froze and listened. Nothing followed. The pipe network could be settling from temperature changes, or something moved across the platform ahead. I climbed the remaining rungs and pulled myself onto the platform. This mezzanine overlooked the pump room below, a maze of thick pipes, rust-colored tanks, and heavy equipment. The room was darker than I remembered. Only a few emergency lights glowed, giving off a faint orange that barely reached the floor. I stayed low and scanned the room. No immediate movement. The control station sat on the far side, behind a row of large pump housings. I moved across the platform slowly, making sure each step fell on solid metal instead of loose grating. The shotgun felt heavy on my shoulder, but switching to it now would force me to climb down the ladder again if something jumped out. The pistol grip was easier to use in tight corners. I kept one hand near it. The air down here smelled of old oil, stagnant water, and something else. Something faint but unpleasant, like decomposing material trapped in a warm space. I reached the ladder that descended into the pump hall floor. The flashlight beam caught scratches on the rungs. Deep gouges. Those were not made by tools. Something with strong fingers or nails pulled itself up or down recently. The pattern matched infected movement. They often clawed at anything vertical when they tried to climb. My pulse quickened, but I climbed anyway. I had come too far to turn back now. When my boots touched the ground, I crouched behind one of the pump housings and waited. The hall felt enormous from this angle, walls rising several stories above. The sound of something dripping echoed rhythmically. I scanned each aisle between the machinery, looking for outlines or shadows that shifted unnaturally. I saw nothing, but the emptiness felt wrong. Infected tended to settle in areas with stable humidity and warmth. This place offered both. I moved toward the control station. The walkway bent slightly to the right. As I rounded the curve, I saw the body. It lay half-crumpled beneath a console. Workplace badge still clipped to the shirt. The skin had lost all color. The jaw hung slightly open. The arms lay twisted. The person looked long dead. I stepped closer and nudged the leg with my boot to be sure. No reaction. The body had no signs of recent movement. The infected had likely passed this one by when searching for noise or warmth. I slipped past and reached the control station. The panels here had a few working indicators powered by a local backup source. I found the manual override switch for the side access door. It was locked under a metal guard that required a key. I cursed under my breath. The guard was standard protocol to prevent unauthorized tampering. I checked drawers, shelves, and the pockets of the dead worker. No key. A loud thud came from somewhere behind the pumps. Not a pipe settling. Too heavy. I raised the shotgun and backed into the shadow behind the console. The sound repeated, closer this time. Something was moving through the pump aisles with uneven steps. I stayed low and watched the darkness between the machinery. A pair of shapes emerged, hunched and slow. Their heads twitched as they scanned the room for movement. They were infected, but not like the ones near the warehouse. These moved irregularly, as if their legs did not coordinate. One leaned heavily on a pipe, dragging the other foot behind. I held my breath and did not move. If I fired here, the echo would bring more from other rooms. I needed another way. The override switch was still locked. Then I noticed the guard plate had screws holding it in place. They were small, but reachable. I slipped the screwdriver from my pocket and began loosening them, one at a time, using slow motions to keep the sound minimal. The infected wandered closer. Their breathing sounded rough and wet. The screwdriver scraped lightly against the guard plate. One infected stopped and turned its head toward me. I froze. It sniffed the air, stepped uncertainly, and moved on. I exhaled quietly, removed the last screw, and pulled the guard free. I flipped the override switch downward. A faint click echoed, followed by a shift somewhere in the upper corridor. The side access door was now unlocked. I pocketed the screwdriver and kept the shotgun aimed at the aisles. More infected drifted through shadows between the pump housings. A thud sounded deeper inside the hall. That noise pulled two more infected toward the far ladder. Their posture tightened. I recognized that shift. They were ready to move fast. This hall was a trap if I stayed. I backed toward the ladder with slow steps. An infected stepped out from between two tanks, covered in coolant stains and grease. It lunged at me. I raised the shotgun and fired center mass. The blast echoed through the hall. The infected collapsed, twitching once before going still. The shot woke everything. Infected emerged from every aisle. Some crawled over equipment. Others staggered around tanks. I grabbed the ladder and climbed fast. Hands scraped the metal behind me. One infected reached the bottom rung, failed to climb, and fell. Another managed to pull itself upward with jerking movements. I reached the mezzanine and turned. The infected climbing best was already halfway up. I waited until its shoulders reached the top rung, then fired. It fell back into the others, knocking several off the ladder. Metal slammed loudly across the hall, triggering more frenzy below. I backed away from the ladder and headed for the exit door. When I pushed it open, something resisted. A collapsed ceiling panel jammed the frame. I shoved again and created a narrow gap. I could squeeze through, but it would take time. The infected reached the mezzanine again. One swung an arm over the platform edge. I shoved my tool bag through the gap, then the shotgun. I turned sideways and forced myself through the opening. My jacket snagged. The infected crawled over the top rung behind me. I braced a hand on the frame, shoved hard, freed the fabric, and rolled through to the other side. The infected slammed into the door seconds later. The hinge bent but held. I grabbed my gear and sprinted down the corridor toward Harper. My arms shook from climbing and forcing myself through the gap. When I reached the junction, Harper was gone. The cabinet she planned to use as a barricade sat crooked, as if she had been interrupted. I approached the technical support center door. It was cracked open. Inside, the emergency lights cast a dim glow. Harper was not behind the cabinet. A streak of dust on the floor led toward the back exit, and her metal pipe lay beside it. I grabbed the pipe and listened to the service hallway. Something dragged lightly across the floor. I followed the sound and found Harper tangled in a fallen cable net. She struggled, tightening the mesh around her legs. Before I reached her, an infected rounded the corner. It moved faster than most, eyes fixed on her. She froze. I slid to the side, lined up the shot, and fired past her shoulder. The infected collapsed. I worked fast to untangle the net. The wires clung to her clothes and boots. Every scrape echoed down the hall. I cut through the smaller loops until her legs came free. She stood unsteadily, but stayed upright. We returned to the technical center. Harper leaned against the console, catching her breath. I told her the override worked, but the pump wing had more infected than before. She nodded uneasily. The path forward was the only option. I checked the shotgun sleeve. Only 2 shells remained. I said it out loud. Harper watched me quietly while I cursed my own mistakes. I had wasted shots in panic. The shotgun was now a last resort tool. We headed for the newly unlocked side access route. The corridor narrowed into maintenance tunnels with weak lighting and bundled cables above us. A cold draft seeped through the bottom gap. Harper listened at the door and heard nothing. We entered the walkway slowly. Below the grated floor, something dragged across metal. Infected stuck in lower channels paced under our footsteps. We kept moving, avoiding the shadows beneath the walkway. At the end, we reached a heavy door to the diesel building. It opened halfway before jamming on a fallen electrical cable. Cutting it was unsafe. We squeezed through one at a time, doing everything quietly. Inside, the diesel building was silent but unstable. Old generators lined the room. A maintenance worker lay crushed beneath one. The crash must have jolted the engine during a restart attempt. Before we could inspect further, a metallic clang echoed from the upper walkway. 2 infected moved along the railing, then jumped down. The first sprinted straight at us. I swung the shotgun like a club instead of firing. Harper smashed its legs. I finished it with a blow to the skull. The second limped toward us. I grabbed a wrench and struck it down. The room quieted. Harper trembled, gripping her pipe tightly. I checked the generators. The first 2 were ruined. The third looked intact enough for a manual crank. I attached the handle and began turning. The engine groaned, rolled, stalled. Harper warned me of noise. I cranked harder. A sound echoed from the far aisle. An infected, twisted at the spine, dragged itself forward. Harper struck it. It tangled in wiring. Its scream drew another infected. A runner, burned and fast. I fired. It dropped instantly. 1 shell left. The realization hit me harder than anything else so far. 1 shell left in a building full of corners. I went back to the crank. I turned it again and again until the engine began building momentum. Then something moved in the ventilation shaft. A scraped hand pushed through. An infected forced its body out and dropped straight toward us. I swung the crank handle, breaking teeth. Harper hit it across the throat. I finished it with the wrench. I cranked again. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The flooring vibrated. Power surged through the system. Harper pointed toward the far wall. An alarm tone echoed from the plant. Uneven coolant flow. The pool level was dropping faster than expected. The plane crash damage was worse than we thought. Another infected struggled free of the wiring. Harper and I finished it quickly. Dust fell from the weakened ceiling. Everything felt unstable. I told Harper the truth. This was only the beginning. The generator bought us time, but not much. If the plane crash ruptured the main coolant pipe, The water level would fall fast. We had to reach the reactor building before the damage grew worse. Harper did not answer. She stared at the floor instead, gripping the pipe so hard her hand shook. Her breathing got uneven. She backed away from the generator room door, as if something invisible pushed her toward the wall. I watched her sink down to a crouch with her elbows resting on her knees. She rubbed her face with trembling fingers and whispered something too low to hear. I stepped closer and asked what was wrong. She kept staring at the concrete between her boots. Then she said it clearly. She could not go in there. She meant the reactor building. She said she was not trained for reactor-level emergencies. She said she was only a security tech who memorized evacuation routes, not nuclear procedures. She said coming here was already beyond what she thought she could handle, and going further felt hopeless. I tried to steady my tone. I reminded her that running away would not solve anything. She shook her head and said running away was exactly what she wanted to do. She said if we left right now, the two of us might survive somewhere else. She said the reactor building was a maze filled with old contamination suits, heavy doors, dead ends, and things neither of us wanted to see again. Her voice cracked halfway through. She dug her knuckles into her forehead and let out a frustrated sound, not loud but rough, like she was holding back something worse. She said she had watched 2 co-workers disappear inside that building during the first outbreak. She never knew if they died, turned, or got trapped. She had nightmares about hearing them banging on the steel doors while she ran. She said going back in now felt like stepping into something designed to kill anyone without full training. I crouched down beside her. I did not touch her. I just spoke. I told her that I understood fear. I understood running. I understood wanting to leave everything behind. But I also told her something I had not said out loud until now. I said that if we left, the people in the warehouse would die slowly, without even knowing why. Their water, their soil, everything around them would turn into a hazard without warning. They would blame sickness or stress. They would never suspect the truth. I could not watch that happen. She knew I was not saying it to be heroic. I did not feel heroic. I felt tired and angry and scared. But I also knew too much to walk away. Harper lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were red. I told her I did not expect her to fight through every hallway. I did not need her to fix pumps or climb ladders. I needed her to stay with me because 2 sets of eyes were better than 1. I needed someone to keep watch while I worked. I needed someone who remembered the building's layout better than me. I needed someone alive who could pull me back if I did something stupid. She exhaled slowly and leaned her head back against the wall. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. How were we supposed to stabilize anything if neither of us remembered every detail of the emergency procedures? I told her we would not rely on memory. There had to be a written protocol somewhere. Every plant had paper binders for shutdown sequences and secondary emergencies. If the system screens were down, the paper protocols were the only fallback. Harper blinked and looked at me with a strange mix of confusion and recognition. She whispered something like, "Emergency binders. The red ones. Control room shelving." She repeated it again, louder this time. She said the control room kept a full set of paper manuals for every major crisis. Loss of coolant, electrical failure, generator failure, fire override, flooding, structural breach. She said she used to dust those binders during slow shifts. She had forgotten about them until now. Her posture changed almost instantly. She stood slowly and wiped her face with her sleeve. Her breathing steadied. She did not look calm, but she looked determined enough to move again. She said reaching the control room would not fix the entire problem, but without those protocols, we would be guessing. She said guessing in a reactor building was suicide. I nodded. That was the first solid lead we had. A manual could give us step-by-step procedures to stabilize the system long enough to buy time. It would tell us which valves to close, which backup pumps to activate, which readings mattered, and which could be ignored. And if the crash knocked out primary sensors, paper instructions were the only trustworthy source left. Harper stepped forward again and picked up the metal pipe. She still looked worn down, but her eyes stayed focused this time. She said she was ready to keep going, not because she felt brave, but because she finally had a direction. She asked if I was sure I wanted to continue with only one shotgun shell left. I told her I did not have a choice. If we turned around now, everything we had done so far would be useless. We left the diesel building and entered the passage leading back into the auxiliary wing. The vibration from the running generator followed us for a while, fading gradually as the corridor swallowed the sound. The emergency lighting flickered overhead, barely illuminating the narrow path ahead. The smell changed again. Less oil, more concrete dust and stale air. As we approached the central fork where several halls intersected, Harper pointed toward the reactor building access route. It was a long hallway lined with reinforced doors on both sides, each one labeled with a different subsystem: coolant routing, containment prep, filtration, radiation monitoring. Most of those rooms would be empty or powered down, but some might hold infected trapped in tight spaces. If they had turned while isolated, they could be in there now, confused and aggressive. We stepped into the corridor slowly. The air noticeably warmed the deeper we went. The reactor building always held more heat, even during shutdown, because of the thickness of its walls and the equipment inside. The ceiling here was higher, the lights spaced farther apart. Harper whispered that the control room sat 2 stories up on the right side. It could be reached through a set of metal stairs near the end of the hall. A distant crash echoed from somewhere above us. Something heavy fell and bounced twice. Harper stopped walking. I could hear her tighten her grip on the pipe. I told her to keep moving. If something fell, it meant part of the building structure was still unstable from the crash. More sections could drop at any time. Staying under the weaker beams was dangerous. We reached the stairwell door. A bent sign hung from the frame, reading, "Control room access. Authorized staff only." Harper pushed the door open with her shoulder. The hinges squealed loudly. The stairwell was dim, but clearer than the hall. No bodies on the steps. No piles of debris. She motioned for me to take the lead. As we climbed, faint noises drifted down from the landing above. Soft feet on metal. Slow pacing. Something alive up there. Harper whispered my name and pointed her pipe upward. I nodded and continued, shotgun raised. At the top of the stairs, the landing stretched into a narrow hallway that led straight to the control room double doors. A slow, dragging sound came from the far left corner of the hall. I flicked the flashlight on. The beam hit a figure leaning against the wall. Its spine bent at an unnatural angle, as if broken weeks ago. Its arm dangled in a way that made it almost useless. But it still reacted to light, jerking toward us and letting out a rough hiss. It pushed off the wall and shambled our way. I had the shotgun ready, but Harper grabbed my arm before I fired. She shook her head and whispered sharply, "No, save it." She stepped forward and struck the infected across the jaw with the pipe. The blow knocked it sideways. I smashed its knee with the wrench handle. The leg snapped backward. The infected fell onto its back, arms flailing in quick spasms. I ended it with one more strike to the skull. No gunfire, no noise spike. The hallway stayed quiet. Harper exhaled and pointed toward the control room doors. We moved quickly now, staying close to the wall in case anything rushed out from the side rooms. When we reached the double doors, she pushed one open and stepped inside. The control room was a mess. Chairs were knocked over, papers everywhere, screens dead or flickering with broken input feeds. A half-eaten meal sat on one of the consoles, rotted now, evidence of a sudden evacuation. Harper went straight to the shelving on the back wall. Rows of old binders collected dust in uneven stacks. She ran her fingers along the spines until she found a large red binder labeled Secondary Containment and Coolant Stabilization Protocols. She handed it to me. It felt heavier than it looked. I opened it on the nearest console. The pages were wrinkled but legible. The first section outlined emergency steps for partial coolant loss during shutdown. It detailed manual valve positions, pump activation sequences, and even diagrams of the backup routing paths. I read each step carefully, while Harper read over my shoulder. A few steps were impossible now. Some required remote control functions that were offline, but others were still doable. We could manually divert water from the secondary reservoir. We could open the auxiliary intake valve near the containment stairwell. We could use the generator to power at least one circulation pump long enough to push water back into the pool. Harper let out a shaky breath. Not panic this time, but relief mixed with fear. She said the plan was risky, but at least it was a plan. She said she no longer felt like running. I closed the binder and tucked it under my arm. Then I told her what came next. We had to reach the reactor hall and physically verify the water level. No manual readings meant no real understanding of the risk. If the pool was exposed, the danger climbed fast. If water still covered the fuel, we had time. Harper nodded, pulled the pipe close to her chest, and told me she was ready. I believed her this time. The panic that held her down earlier was still somewhere inside her, but she pushed it aside. She walked with more control, not fast, but steady. The red emergency binder knocked lightly against my ribs as we moved, and I kept one hand on it as if it might vanish if I lost focus. We moved down the next hallway toward the containment wing. The air there felt thicker, warmer. The reactor building always ran hotter, even in shutdown, and the lack of steady circulation made the entire area feel trapped. The overhead pipes dripped condensation. Some sections groaned from the stress of shifting metal. The plane crash had clearly done more damage than the plant's outer design intended to absorb. When we reached the containment access door, Harper tapped the panel beside it. The electronic lock was dark, but the manual wheel mechanism remained intact. She stepped back so I could take the lead. I set the binder down for a moment and gripped the wheel with both hands. The metal squealed. It resisted at first, but after several turns, I felt the internal lock shift. I pushed the door open slowly. A wave of hot air rolled out. Inside, the containment corridor stretched long and unnervingly empty. The floor was clean except for dust. The walls reflected the orange emergency lighting strips. Everything looked abandoned but intact. Harper whispered that the pool observation deck sat on the upper platform, reached by a metal stairway to the right. I nodded and motioned for her to stay close. Every footstep echoed. My skin felt sticky from the heat. The closer we got to the observation deck, the louder the hum of floor vibration became. Not the movement of infected. This was the generator feeding limited power through the building. A good sign. It meant the circulation pump had at least some power, even if the flow was inconsistent. We reached the metal stairs. I went first with the shotgun low and the wrench tucked at my belt. Harper followed, stepping lightly. Halfway up, I paused and listened. Nothing. No groans, no scraping. Just the steady vibration of machinery fighting to stay alive. At the top, we reached the glass observation window. The room was lit by a single flickering emergency lamp. Harper stood beside me as I wiped dust from the glass with my sleeve. The pool sat below, a large rectangular structure that held the spent fuel racks. Steam drifted upward gently, not violently. The water level was lower than normal, but still high enough to cover the rods completely. Harper let out a long breath. I opened the binder and found the section on coolant stabilization. The steps were blunt and direct. Divert secondary reservoir flow. Open the auxiliary intake valve. Start the circulation pump sequence manually. Monitor temperature drop for at least 10 minutes before locking the system. We followed the map in the binder to reach the valve station. It sat behind a narrow corridor lined with old black and yellow warning signs. The wheel valve was stiff, but I leaned into it until it shifted. A low rumble traveled through the pipes. Harper checked the auxiliary gauge nearby. The needle rose slowly. Water was entering the system from the secondary reservoir. Next step, circulation pump. We climbed down to the lower platform. The pump assembly sat against the far wall, covered in dust and dried coolant stains. Harper read the three-step sequence from the binder. I followed exactly. First switch engaged, second switch locked, third switch held for 15 seconds. The pump answered with a deep mechanical shake that grew into a steady rolling vibration. Harper checked the temperature readout. The number dropped slowly, not fast, not dramatic, but downward, steady. The system was stabilizing. She leaned against the railing and closed her eyes for a moment. I did not say anything. I let the relief settle in. The reactor hall was still damaged. The building was still unstable. But the worst outcome, the one that would poison the valley, kill the warehouse group, and erase this entire region, was slipping away. We had done enough to buy time. Days at least. Maybe weeks if the pump held. We walked back to the containment corridor. Harper stopped halfway, looked at me, and said she wanted to leave now. Her voice shook again, but this time from relief, not panic. She said she wanted to breathe outside air, even if it smelled like smoke. She wanted to see open sky again. I agreed. We had no reason to stay. Everything we could fix was fixed. The walk out of the plant took longer than it should have. Exhaustion slowed both of us. The emergency lights felt dimmer, the corridors felt heavier, but we reached the administration building without incident. The infected that filled the halls earlier were gone or stuck in other rooms. The golden hour sunlight bleeding through broken windows looked strange after being inside the heat and noise for so long. We exited through the same gate where I first entered. The air outside felt cool against my skin. The valley looked quiet. Too quiet, but safe enough for travel. My truck sat where I left it, untouched. I checked behind us one last time to make sure nothing followed. Nothing moved in the plant yard. Harper stood beside me, her shoulders low and relaxed for the first time since I met her. She adjusted the strap on her utility vest and looked toward the road that led back to the warehouse. Then she turned to me. Her expression softened in a way I did not expect. She stepped closer and rested her hand lightly on my arm. Before I could step back or say anything awkward, she leaned in and kissed me. Not long, not dramatic, just honest. When she pulled back, she smiled. Tired, messy, real. She pointed toward the truck and asked, "Well, are you coming? Or are you going to stand here until the sun goes down?" I did not know what to say at first. My mind jumped between the warehouse, the people waiting there, the stable reactor, the long road ahead, and the sudden shift in her expression. Confusion mixed with something warm I had not felt in weeks, maybe months. I finally nodded and opened the driver door. She climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation. The truck engine coughed once, then started strong. I backed up, turned toward the main road, and drove us away from the plant. No alarms, no explosions, no infected chasing us through the gate. Only a quiet valley and a long road leading back to people who still had a future. Harper rested her head back and closed her eyes. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other steady on the gear shift. For the first time since the outbreak started, the silence felt good. We left the plant behind, alive, and carrying the knowledge that the worst danger had been stopped, at least for now. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you. What moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership. Carlos Herrera, Dominique Johnson, The Great Anywho, Jadala, Madam Midnight, Deborah Powell, William Blackwell, TJR. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.